I'm pretty sure that you've listened to Wes Montgomery or George Benson playing a solo and thought, I wish I could sound like that. But when you're playing jazz, then you're busy with scales and arpeggios and getting the lines to fit together without losing the form. When you're starting out learning jazz guitar, then you often get stuck with the first problem that you run into. What notes go where? And that's not so strange because it is pretty difficult to navigate a jazz song and play the right notes in the right place. But once you start to be able to do that, then you need to also start developing other things, and especially rhythm and phrasing. Because if you let the notes and the harmony dictate your phrasing, then you're not gonna sound that great. You're probably checking out licks and solos and trying to figure out how they work in terms of what scale, arpeggio or chromatic thing is used, so that you can use that in your own playing as well. And this is something that you want to do with rhythm and phrasing as well. And the important part is that you start with something that you hear and then use that to create your own material. Let me show you what you can do with a simple and short Wes Montgomery phrase just to start opening up your own playing. Check out this phrase, short but amazing, from the second chorus of his solo on No Blues of the Smoking at the Half Note album. Obviously, we could focus on what notes he's using here, and that is actually interesting, but let's try and see if there's something to be learned from the rhythm and the phrasing, because Wes is truly a master when it comes to really making strong and clear phrases, also in terms of rhythm, and that part of it will already make you sound 10 times better. To keep it simple, I'm going to cut off the pickup, but I will talk about adding pickups later in the video, because that is another very important skill to develop. Removing the pickup leaves us with this phrase. I picked a phrase where I like the rhythm, and maybe also because I sort of like the shape of the phrase, so how the melody is flowing, and I'll start by keeping that in there. But when you're working like this, you of course don't have to do that. First, you want to get that phrase into your system, and a good way to do that is to sing it, because then you can really hear and feel how it works. And we can also hear that when I'm singing this phrase, then the flow of the original phrase is still kinda in there. Ba 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 da ba da ba boo da. And in the way that I sing it, there are also some accents, so some notes are louder than the rest. Ba 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 da ba da ba boo da. And those accents are actually quite important. You want to have those in there and pay attention to them, because accents is everything when it comes to bebop phrasing in eighth note lines. A short side note on learning by ear, because one of the ways that I trained this for myself, and I think also what is the traditional approach to teaching this, is learning solos by ear. And when you do that, you want to keep playing them with the track for a long time after figuring them out. And in that way, you're going to get those phrases and the rhythms into your system. And that is useful for a lot of things. So you want to keep doing that. But what I'm covering here is more of a focused way to really just focus on rhythm and phrasing. Your goal now is to figure out how to hear phrases with this rhythm. And I think the easiest way to do that is to stick with the shape of the melody or the flow that I've talked about. Here's a simple version using the Wes rhythm and flow on a G major 7 chord. Or maybe something like this. Try to recognize the flow in there and also judge for yourself if you think it works as a line. And keep in mind that this is to get you out of always just playing. An important thing to keep in mind, so that you don't feel like you're banging your head against the wall, is that you start doing this with a phrase that you probably consider the perfect jazz lick. And obviously, doing this exercise is not going to give you 150 perfect jazz licks that will blow everybody's mind. In fact, it's not so much about the licks as it is about the process, because what you're training is to hear phrases with that melody and that rhythm. You should only check if the lick does actually work, and if it does, then it's fine, and if some of them don't, you learn from that as well. I remember when I was just getting into jazz and I came across this very solid bebop line, or even a bebop cliché, which is an example of octave displacement and could probably be taken out of a Bach piece as well, but it works so well in jazz. And because I'd never heard of octave displacement or direction of melody, then I spent a long time coming up with one failed phrase after another. And at the time, I could hear that it didn't work, but I really couldn't figure out why or how to fix it in a consistent way. That came much later. That's why in the beginning you want to stick close to the original phrase, because then there's a bigger chance that you'll write lines that make sense. Check this out, then I'll explain. Now I'm not trying to keep the direction of the melody, I'm just using the rhythm to make a new line and listening for how it should be phrased, which in this case actually gives us a few different accents compared to the original. And in case you forgot or if you didn't know, then often in bebop lines it really sounds great if you give an accent to a high note in the line which is not on the beat. It's not a rule, so you're gonna find exceptions all over the place, but that is what I'm doing here, and it really does make it sound a lot better. Here's another example. Let's say that you can come up with some phrases using the rhythm that we got from Wes. So now what you can try to do is to play some core response soloing using those phrases and then see what you hear after playing that phrase. I'll do this on a G major 7 chord. Think of it as a never-ending loop of the first part of I Remember April. Keep in mind that you don't have to do this in time, and if you have a line that you like, then it can be really useful to play that several times and then just come up with different responses to it. Because this is about starting to place it in your vocabulary and making it work with all the other things that you're playing. Now I also want to talk about another way that you can open up your playing and not get stuck too much on the bar lines. This could almost be an independent video. One of the problems that you run into when you're learning to spell out chord changes in your solos is that you want to play clear notes on beat 1 when the chord is changing. This is not a bad habit, but you do need to move beyond that if you don't want to sound like you're sort of boxed in by the bar lines. Your melodies should have a much more natural, much more free flow on top of the song. Luckily, if you're used to playing toward target notes, then you can easily start to practice playing into the chord with a pickup, something like this. And another thing that you also want to start exploring is not ending lines on the target note on beat 1. Instead, you want to continue into the bar, something like this. When you're making lines using rhythms and phrasing like this, then you do need to understand jazz solos and how to create jazz lines that work. Otherwise, there's nothing to phrase or add rhythm to. So check out this video if you want to explore how to develop this and learn the essential building blocks that make up jazz lines.